And good evening and welcome to the February 10th, 2025 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment, and those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 22, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meetings materials page of the City of Eugene website. In case of a medical emergency, an automated external defibrillator, AED, is located on the counter behind staff to your left on that side of the room. In case of an emergency evacuation, emergency exits are located through the double doors at the back of the room, and the doors to the patio can also be used if needed. Thank you again for joining us. I now call the February 10th, 2025 City Council work session to order. Our topic tonight is part 2 of the Council Budget Priorities Workshop conversation. And before we begin, I want to turn it over to Councilor Ye for a brief announcement.
Yeah, thank you. I just need to make a statement about my employment. So I am employed by Community Supported Shelters, a nonprofit entity that contracts with the City of Eugene to run several rest stop sites. In an abundance of caution and to ensure full transparency, I am declaring a potential conflict of interest because the council's discussion and actions today could affect the budget proposed by the city manager and could, in turn, affect the city's funding for community-supported shelters. I have been advised by the city attorney's office that following my declaration of this potential conflict of interest, I can fully participate in today's discussions and actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I will now turn it over to the city manager to introduce our topic.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Looking forward to your 2 hours of conversation tonight, and I'll try not to take up too much of it, but I do have quite a lot of information to share with you. In addition to my presentation and my being here, I'm joined by our Chief Financial Officer, Twyla Miller, and I believe all of the department heads, execs are here in the audience. If not, they're available online. So I'll just start with that. Kind of this is where we sort of left off, where that flag is. We've been in this conversation a couple of meetings, and tonight we're going to walk through a little bit of context and history. I think it's always important to do that. I know it can feel frustrating if you've been in this conversation, but a lot of people haven't. I'm going to walk through some of the assumptions that we used when thinking about the scenarios we're presenting, impacts, and next steps. I will also say that when I'm finished, we have some one-pagers that are not part of the presentation, but simplify it so that you can go back and forth without having to look at your electronic equipment. So again, our path to today, it's gone actually since the recession, and I'll show a slide that refers to that. But really, we've been in this conversation since you adopted the 23 to 25 biennial budget. And in that budget, we made a number of reductions, close to $30 million worth of general fund reductions. And also, you asked to place a revenue plug in that budget for $8.3 million, recognizing that the cuts to service would be pretty significant without that. So pretty soon after that, like some of those little colored dots after that, we convened a group. We started talking about revenue. And there were really 4 different areas that we were talking about with revenue. One was the 8.3 critical funding gap that was right there that we needed to solve. The second is what I called areas at risk, which were things that had been funded one time, either through ARPA funds or through one-time general funds, that we were going to be coming to a cliff of at the end of the biennium. The third was new and/or expanded services, which could include new mandates or new desires for services such as fire or others that we've talked about. And then the fourth area that I talked about with you and with the revenue advisors was the tools and mechanics we use to do that. So we actually have more stability going forward, and we don't find ourselves continuously in this space. So when I convened the revenue advisors, they were really talking about, most importantly, the critical funding gap. But because we've had 2 years go by, these things are now smashing together, and that will become clear when I walk back through what the target is that we set a couple of weeks ago. So the revenue work started in earnest with a staff team report where they studied about 43 different revenues. You received this report back in 2023 and really took a deep dive into each of these to understand what it could generate, what the pros and cons were, and we used that work as the basis of the work with a group of community advisors I called the revenue advisors. And just without going deep into it, I'm just going to say this is generally where they spent the most of their time. I realize people in the audience can't see that too well. But the area they really spent a lot of time talking about were, or most interest, I would say, were admissions and entertainment tax, fee for service, which is what we're talking about potentially tonight, local option property tax levy, payment in lieu of taxes, a personal income tax, and a restaurant tax. They pretty quickly took off the admissions entertainment tax and the restaurant tax because of the point that we were looking at the critical funding gap made it very difficult to make that happen in a timely way. Similarly, a payment in lieu of taxes would be with a group, with somebody like the University of Oregon, we would not have been able to negotiate that deal in time, and they would need to agree to that. Personal income tax kind of came off the table because that was seen as maybe a future revenue source for housing in particular. And then the local option property tax levy essentially came off the table because at the time we were talking about this, there was only 26 cents left in the $10 cap per thousand, and that would have generated less than $6 million and taken up all of the leftover space, knowing that there's other partners. That number's up a little bit higher, and we may talk about that a little bit later. But that's why we sort of came up with the fee for service as being maybe what made the best and most sense. It also made a lot of sense because many cities across the state have been doing this, and in particular, I always point to Medford because Medford has been put into place a fee for parks, police, and fire in 2005. And then I always talk about why fire and EMS. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the fee. I just feel like you have to reorient it a little bit. But the reason why the recommendation came forward for fee for me is that I really think of fire and EMS being more like a utility than not. And so it felt to me like similar to stormwater and wastewater, where you have a 24-hour-a-day operation, 7 days a week, that relies on infrastructure and actually needs infrastructure to grow and build with the city. It really should follow more of a utility model. And a utility model allows you to do kind of like what eWeb's doing now. You can adjust your rates if you need new infrastructure, and you can kind of take that over time. Whereas the general fund, when it's growing over the years at 2.4%, doesn't allow for that to happen in a way that I think is critical for the future of Eugene. The problem we've been trying to solve this whole time, and I know it's not the only problem, but I use this one because the general problem is that the general fund is not earning enough revenue in order to pay for the services that we have, and it hasn't been for a long time. We've been making cuts, and our FTE per thousand has been going down, but it essentially is this. So all revenue types, I said 2.4 before, I guess it was 2.7. You look at the limitations on property tax, the fact that you don't have any sort of rate-setting ability with the eWeb contribution in lieu of taxes. We do have some administrative over our service charges that we've been bumping up. But because of that, it really is kind of stalled out at 2.7, and it's very difficult to keep our expenses, especially over the last 5 years, within that 2.7% framework. There's lots of different ways that people have suggested you could make that number come up, either through more development, but that's really the math problem that we've been trying to solve. As I said, these have been kind of happening over time since the recession. Even the years that don't show an arrow are years that we put spending freezes in place internally to save money to make it less painful the next year. So there hasn't been a year, I don't think, since the Great Recession where people and staff haven't been asked to be more mindful, more efficient, and holding resources. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, and I started to think about it, is all of these things hang on each other. So when I go into tonight's $11.5 million scenarios, and again, it's not the budget, but when I go into the scenarios, they're really hanging on last year's $32 million. You can't think of it out of context. A good example is if you look at a reduction in municipal court in isolation with this 11.5, and you don't consider the significant reduction we took last year, those things just play together, and you'll see that a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the general fund target that we are going to be talking about tonight and how you got there. We talked about this already, but I really want to make it clear to folks that are just tuning in, and actually to people around the table, there's been a little bit of confusion. So the 6.9 structural gap. So the 8.3 number was the one I just talked about. This biennial budget has an $8.3 million revenue plug. You passed a stormwater fee that closed about $1 million of that, and we received some better health information than what we had initially projected. And so that number, structural gap, is actually at 6.9. So that is the base structural gap. The next two items I want to, there you'll see they're in different colors. The next two items, EPD's budget that was adopted and in forecast into the future projected $1 million in vacancy savings, and I dared the chief to catch me. I was like, I did not want him to freeze the positions and not hire them. I said, hire as fast as you can, and if you can hire as fast as you can and you get within that, then we'll have to cross that bridge when we got there. And he's there. He's now into that $1 million, and so we need to solve for that, and I'm recommending that we include that in the gap. The mandated state planning, again, is $500,000 that we're adding to the gap for work we are required to do by the state that we don't have the funding to do. So both of those feel like imminent dollars we're going to have to find dollars for. And the way that it's going to be built in is, and I have the lock on the side, is that we would restore that to those departments, but in a way that it's actually in a different line item that they can't spend unless they get to it. So if the chief doesn't fill his vacancies, those dollars can flow back either into reserves or to another council priority. The rest of these are items that we are shifting that have been all funded with one-time dollars up to this point, that you wanted to look at potential scenarios to shift that to ongoing. The only way you can shift these to ongoing is either to generate new revenue or to reallocate funding from existing programs and services to this. And so it represents a gap, but that's how you get to the 11.5. I've seen some emails saying, how could you go from 8.3 to 11.5? And this is what's there. All right, so really quick. So this is how, we've talked about how the general fund is allocated. I'm going to show this a couple of different ways. But under the scenario A, you asked for a scenario that spread that $11.5 million across departments in the way that they're currently budgeted. So as you can see, I always point to police at 37.5. They're the largest. They have the largest amount of the general fund, so their cut would be the largest in that scenario. Scenario B was spreading that and trying to hold the core of the fire and police services whole. And so I don't have the number there right now, but it essentially just means those two departments go down, and the rest of the departments absorb that on a per department allocation basis. So there's a couple of things I want to make sure are really clear before we get deep into this. The first one is, this is not the budget proposal, and I think a lot of people are confused by that. Depending on how tonight's conversation goes, we will finalize the budget that will be presented in April, and it may have a number of these things on here. It may have something different, but it's, I've been a little bit nervous that people think this is the actual proposed budget, so I just want to be clear. But because people are unclear, we have been talking to every employee group that's impacted by this and partners that are impacted by this, because we're going to be talking about them tonight, and that seemed fair and respectful. This isn't typically how we do this, so this is, you'll see another slide of this, it's a little bit larger. This is showing the general fund in those department silos, to not use a great word, but it's the one people understand. We don't typically budget in this way, but for the purposes of this, we are. We've kept in mind legal requirements, so things that we're legally required to do, or things that only the city can do, there's nobody else out there doing, those things tended to not show up on the list as much. Things that have been, there are other, I would call it a legal requirement, but also just sort of a promise to the voters of other levies and things you've put in place that require a base level of a service in some place. So for example, the community safety payroll tax has some assumptions about funding levels for police. The library levy has some assumptions about, core service and then add. So we've had to really be thoughtful to the greatest extent possible about what we can put here and still meet those promises. And then the last piece I want to say is two of our departments are going through pretty deep reviews right now. So Library, Recreation, Cultural Services, we have a consultant that's diving deep in, benchmarking us across the country, looking at the way we do work to see, are there other ways we could do this? Do they have ideas? Are there creative things we're not doing we should do? And all of our central business functions separately are going through a very similar review. Without those two, and in particular, without those results, there's things on this list that are hard for me to understand, can we actually do that or not? So I'll talk about that more when we get there. But it could be that we're going to, if you choose not to move forward, we're going to want a little bit of flexibility to respond to what may come out of some of those reports, which could be really helpful. All right, this might be the entirely redundant slide. Every presentation needs to have one. But this is representing the general fund only and how the departments are invested in the general fund. The same on the left as the one on the right. And the reason why I'm showing them both is because the one on the right feels a little bit like how we are responding to this scenario, which is not typical. So using police again as an example, with their allocation at 4.3 million, we are only looking within that dark blue police bar to give you what the representation of those impacts are. I'm going to give you a key for how we're going to go through this, and then we're going to walk through department by department. So the first thing is every department's going to be represented on this kind of like Monopoly card look. So you're going to get the department name, the target that they were given based on the direction from you, the FTE impacts at the top. And these are rough. None of these are totally refined. Some of the departments will have a top line that says operational shifts. These are for items like a vacancy or a realignment of a funding source that probably doesn't need a significant amount of attention because it's a small amount and it's not something that you or the public necessarily are going to respond to immediately. And as a reminder, even if you pass a $10 million fire fee, we're still going to be making $3.5 million worth of reduction. So some of these things need to happen regardless. I'm presenting this in funding ranges, and partly because it's very difficult to get down to the dollars and cents, but essentially what you'll see is this is a range of what it is. I can get more specific kind of with you, but essentially when you look at the card, it will take all of the things on this card to get to the target. And then the last thing is there's some shading at the bottom. So for some of the departments, like police, you'll see the full scenario, and then it shades in as you pull that number back up. And the other departments, it goes the other direction as you get deeper into the cut. So I'll explain that as we go through it, but the scenarios are represented through the shading. All right, I'm going to start with EPD. Police has the largest of the reductions at $4.3 million. And when the chief is looking at how to provide critical police services and reduce this out of his budget, these are the items that go that could potentially be impacted. The first is animal welfare unit, which would include our animal welfare officers and our contract to Greenhill. The bailiff unit, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about all of these, but the other direction. The bailiff unit, which is a couple of officers that help deal with bailiff duties, so we're not taking patrol officers off the street. would eliminate our final community safety officer that's in the general fund. It would eliminate the volunteers and policing program. Would eliminate the community engagement team, which is our crime prevention team. And I'm just calling that out because not everybody understands what community engagement is. And then you're down to what is essentially 10 FTE, so 10 patrol officers that would either be sort of the downtown team or the traffic safety unit. And the reason why they're on there as an alternative is I didn't have total confidence yet that we could do this reduction with the downtown team, given how we are investing community safety payroll tax into that. And so we have to have a little bit of wiggle room if you go in this direction. If asked, hey, I got to protect the core, then the things that would still come off the list, so essentially we would add back the community engagement team, the crime prevention officers, and those 10 patrol officers. So you would still potentially have those top 4 items on the reduction list. Now, with both police and fire and every other department, I know that there's folks at this table that would say this whole card should come off the list. And that's, what I basically asked was if it was the core, and we had to really go through and make these reductions, given that we're trying to still provide a citywide of services. But you may make a different call about where that line goes. With fire and EMS, to get to a 2.6 reduction, we would eliminate the incident command alternative response position we added in last year's budget, and we would remove the entire Whitebird contract with Cahoots. Part of the reason of that is similar to what I said before. If there's somebody else that's providing that service, those are things that tended to be like, would come up on the list. In this case, we have Lane County doing mobile crisis response in a way that we didn't 2 years ago, so there's actually some viability to that. Next would be the technical rescue team, the hazmat team, and then the seasonal station closure, which is essentially one of 11 companies that would be reduced 29 weeks out of the year, which means one of the neighborhood stations would be essentially closed for half a year, and you would lose that first response area. If asked to protect the core, we would add back the hazmat team and the seasonal station closure. You would still have impacts to alternative response and potentially the technical rescue team. Library, recreation, and cultural services, 1.9, and then it shifts to 3.7. So 1.9 would be how they are currently invested in the general fund. The 3.7 is what they absorb when we add back those police and fire services. So scenario A and B, I'll walk through. So some of the same operational shifts, smaller amounts. Direct partner support is dollars that checks we essentially write to organizations in the community we feel like we would not be able to do anymore. And that would include, and I've notified these groups, Kid Sports, Boys and Girls Club, Arts and Business Alliance of Eugene are 3 that I could name right there. Could mean the closure of Amazon Pool. This is something that would be difficult to do, could potentially, I forgot to mention this. So under scenario A, that 1.9 million has 8 FTE and 150 temporary positions. And I think it's important to note the temporary positions because that's a lot of people that are employed through the summer. Amazon Pool, there could be a potential opportunity with a partner that maybe could step in and run that facility. We would need some time to do that, but that's essentially, we would need to close that. Likely a community center closure, most likely Sheldon. Again, if you have questions about like how did you get here, it's often around how are services spread around the community, what's being used, what's getting used the most. Sheldon is mostly a childcare, which is unfortunate because we need that childcare. But it represents about, I think, 50 families. Is that about right? Okay, 50 families. And we'd be closing the downtown library for a day. Now, I'll say this. So when you get deeper into it, the FTE count goes up to 20, 225 temporary positions. We'd be closing the downtown library for a second day. And then this, to get to the 3.7, we'd essentially be looking at closing Sheldon, Amazon, and Riverhouse community centers and restructuring the entire way we do youth and family services. The reason that it's done it, and so there's different ways you can mix and match that, right? You could close the downtown library for 2 days and not close Sheldon until you get into the deeper cut. So there's different ways to do it. But all of these areas would be impacted if we're making reductions to this level. Public Works is the smallest, has the smallest investment in the general fund. So you can see under scenario 1, it's $305,000. That would be reducing developed parks maintenance. So, things like the frequency of cleaning restrooms, garbage cleanup, basic things you would expect in a developed kind of neighborhood park. If we go deeper, double in, we are looking at the possibility of cutting our volunteers and community gardens program, mostly because we feel like there's promises to the voters around park maintenance that we just can't go deeper into that category, so we would unfortunately be in that position. Planning and Development, the second smallest department. Under the $800,000 scenario, we are looking at a reduction into the economic development work and some FTE there. The second would be one of two things, I think, and again, you can kind of mix and match. Several have suggested that maybe the city shouldn't be in the homeless service work. Some of the work we do around just some of the basic support work around homelessness. These positions are not the like on the street cleanup positions. This is more of the administrative work. So it's possible that we could reduce that and try to move contracts and that work to one of our partners. We have not had those conversations, but that's something that's potential. Alternatively, we could keep the HSC funds that we could keep those funds and fund our own services and continue to fund HSC potentially with one-time dollars. And if you get to the deeper cut, then we are cutting 4 of our neighborhood service officers. Now, I'm going to just pause here for a second because there's 2 things on this slide that are actually part of the gap. Remember when you were doing the gap and you were saying, bring us, ideas for this, and I said some of those things might be on the list. There's 2 things here that are on the list. So HSC funds is one of the things. You have a target to shift from one-time to ongoing. In neighborhood services, you have a target to shift from one-time to ongoing. But there's not a lot of room in this department to move. You'd have to essentially shift cuts into planning. And planning is something we're also adding dollars to because we have more work than they can do. Central services. So central services has a number of operational shifts, and then there's just a lot of small, if you might remember that when we showed you the program budget, we have a lot of small programs in central services. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful on how I talk about this, because if you say you're closing the downtown library for a day, there's a number of FTE who may be impacted, but if you say you're going to cut one of these things, you're a very specific person and you know you're impacted, so it's a little bit harder. We have a vacant position in doing central communications. This is not the communications director, but it's a support role that we would eliminate. We would eliminate some contractual dollars to downtown cleanups and to the downtown flower program. It's both things. Neighborhood services, this is the service in its entirety, so the FTE and the funding and contracts. This would eliminate, in addition, a member on our emergency management team, one of our energy management program employees, and a shift in FTE in the Employee Resource Center. Central Services is one of the departments that has had to go to 2 pages. So when you get to the second deeper cut, in order to get to 3.4 million, we're looking at having to eliminate something like potentially our entire intergovernmental relations program, and I can't figure out how we would make that work. So that would include, the whole program includes all of the memberships, the contracts we have with Smith Dawson Associates, all of that, and an FTE. Office of Equity and Community Engagement, again, that would be the remainder of what would happen after you took out neighborhood services. We'd potentially have to reduce the scope of municipal court pretty significantly, to the point that I wonder, are we still doing municipal violations, or do we really need to do a major overhaul? And that's kind of how it is with all of this. These things are very painful to put on the list, but it's really difficult to sit in this chair and understand I don't know how we would eliminate, for example, a central business function and still get the business function done. So I'm not going to pull out any specifics, but if you were going to pull out one of Twyla's, a work group in Twyla's area, if we eliminate it, we might save some money, but the costs distribute right back out to the departments, who would have to do that themselves. So that one's harder for me to figure out how we would do that. Most of the positions are funded through a mix of funds. So for every one of those positions, you save 60% of the general fund. The other 40% is being paid by non-general funds. So if you're in a non-general fund like Public Works, you might be able to afford to hire your own analyst that's doing finance work. However, if you're in police and fire and you're mostly general funded, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's just a lot more challenging, but in order to get to this magnitude of numbers, it would take a mix of things exactly like what you're looking at on this list. So to be clear, to get to 11.5 million in the across-the-board scenarios, meaning police is fully in and fire is fully in, it would take all of these things to get there. And if you take those off the list, then it takes all of these things to get there. That's what's on these handouts. So as you start to talk about this, these handouts essentially have these last two slides, so you can just easily refer to them and ask me questions. You've seen this slide before. I think the question tonight is which direction we're going. One option is, what was proposed earlier, which is $10 million fire service fee, $2 million of which is new fire service, still would have $3.5 million of general fund cuts. Alternatively, we look at $11.5 million of general fund cuts. We're up against a bit of a timeline. Within the next 2 weeks, next week, we will finalize our budget depending on how tonight's conversation goes. We recognize that could mean, so if you decide, hey, we don't want to go forward with a fee, or we do, you can change this number at the top. But I'll be putting together a proposed budget that we potentially amend before you adopt it, or we adopt it and we make cuts and we do a supplemental. It can go a lot of different ways depending on how this goes tonight. I don't actually know how it's going to go tonight. The most important part I need you to know is we will build a budget and have it to you in April, and it may not be the right one, and we may have to fix it. So that's what I have. I don't think I'm going to need to pull this back up because you have everything I think you need here, but I can if we need to.
Thank you, City Manager, for that presentation. Thank you, staff. I was reviewing our meeting materials over the weekend, and I noted that tonight is the 25th meeting with this as an agenda item to discuss the 2023 to 2025 budget and this gap. And I think that speaks to the importance of this decision point, but also that the work hasn't been easy or taken lightly, and certainly is a difficult discussion and decision for this body to have before it. I also want to just take a moment to thank council and staff for extending tonight's work session to 2 hours. We did not want to be rushed through this discussion and this decision point, and I appreciate the effort that's gone into even just making that happen and stretching our time together, especially as we're processing a lot of information and a challenging topic. So with that, I will now open the floor to council discussion. I will note it's 5:38 nearly right now. By I think about 6:15, I'm going to ask the council president to put a motion forward, and I have two councilors already in the queue. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Manager, thank you very much for the presentation. That makes it abundantly clear what we have to get done tonight, and makes hard choices very, very clear in terms of the people that work for the city. So this is not an easy discussion for anybody. Madam City Attorney, at the end of our discussion here, we're going to have motions on the table, as the mayor just said. If I were to, and we know what those motions are, for example, moving forward with this fire fee, that's one of the motion options on the table. If I were to propose an amendment that fire fee needed to be voted on by the people of Eugene in a May election, I would have, we would have a need to make such a decision and go through the mechanisms required to refer that by February 19th. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And that would be our only opportunity to see this on a May election in front of the people, correct?
That is correct. If the council were to adopt the ordinance this evening and the signatures were to be collected, so let's say there wasn't an amendment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I apologize. I didn't mean to stop you. I was just going to say, for our control and our ability to
Yes.
refer out to a May election, if we wanted it in May, that we would have to do this, and it takes a couple of steps. So we'd have to finish those steps by February 19th. In other words, we'd have to vote in favor of such a motion tonight in order to see it on the May ballot. I just want to be really abundantly transparent and clear to my colleagues. I plan to offer such a motion tonight, and I hope that I'll have your support for such a thing, because the other alternative, as near as I understand it, is I believe it is a virtual certainty that the 5,800 signatures, petition signatures required to send this to a public vote would be gathered. And if anybody doubts that, you received an email tonight that lists all the folks who were involved in the process of getting such a referral put together and collecting those signatures. Am I correct in assuming that in the event that takes place and those signatures are collected by March 13th, which is their deadline, that election would most likely be held in August?
It would be correct. It would be held in August if the council allowed for the special election to occur. It would be August 26th. Otherwise, it would be in November.
And so the only way really in those two potential scenarios for us to know that what the people would allow us to do if we decided to ask them is for us to vote in favor of an amendment to send this to the people for a vote tonight. Correct?
That would be correct. I mean, to get it, unless the signatures could be collected in 2 weeks. So that's why I'm saying, if in fact, they have 30 days to collect the signatures. If the signatures were collected in 2 weeks and they were submitted, then that would be the only way
Before February 19th, is that what you're saying?
Not before February. If the council adopted the ordinance today without it referring it, and the signatures were collected for the citizens to refer it, and they collected the signatures in 2 weeks, that could get on the May ballot. But they would have 30 days to do it, and our presumption is they would take the 30 days to do it, which would put it on to August 26th.
Thank you. I'll make that motion when the timing is appropriate. Thank you.
Councilor Zelinka.
Yeah, thank you for doing all this work. I know it was very difficult to do and very hard on staff. I also know some people needed to see this list of very specific cuts. And for those people, I hope you read this and see what's in here, and look at the things that would go away if there's no new revenue. With the $67 million plus in cuts that we've made over the years, the fat and inefficiencies that were in the system are gone. What we're faced with now is making deep cuts into departments and eliminating whole services, and that's what you're seeing here. This isn't a lot of efficiencies here and efficiencies there. That's all gone. So we're eliminating whole services, some hard choices indeed. So the list is very hard to look at. It's hard to, and very painful. More importantly, it's hard for me to fathom what this city looks like with all these things gone. And I know that's very hard for people on a fixed income or living paycheck to paycheck to stomach increases in city fees, but a lot of those services that you use are in this list and they would go away. And we've structured this so that it's a pretty modest $3 to $6 for really small homes, so more lower income folks a month. And so for me, this alternative is just a bridge too far. And I'm in favor of implementing the fire fee. And I would even go further than that. I think the fire department has had struggled, as are many other departments, for quite a long time. So I would also propose that we ask for a levy on a ballot, which you have to, for fire operations increase. And then also that we go look for a future bond to do capital for new fire stations, refurbishing the existing ones, and buying new equipment. So it would be the fire fee, a levy, and a capital bond for future fire stations. So I think that's the preferred way to go about doing this structural problem with the budget, but also dealing with the needs of the fire department. And I'm not really interested in a bruising and divisive campaign in our city over this. So I won't support your motion, Mike.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 5, under the revenue work, I want to thank the staff revenue team for coming up with six suggestions and whittling it down to what's in front of us tonight. And yet, I would be remiss if I didn't point out the 5 scenarios that were under consideration. The legitimacy of having that conversation, though they may be long-term fixes. City Manager, I believe you said that the fee for service new or increased was the suggestion that, quote, made the most sense. I would add, for now. And I concur with the sentiment, albeit I have some reservations around how this would impact low-income folks, folks who might be living on federally subsidized affordable housing. I have a question about any potential carve-outs or relief for those who, and I recognize that it's tiered based on square footage, though it isn't exactly as progressive as I would like. Were there any scenarios under consideration or any potential future scenarios that could help our most vulnerable populations at a certain economic threshold that has not been enumerated this evening?
I think the way that we presented it to you before and what is anticipated is that a portion of what we receive through the fee would be placed and put in with eWebs if we bill through eWeb, and if not through ours, a customer care account that folks that are low income that are already qualified through eWeb would automatically qualify for this, and would also be another avenue for people to apply for that assistance.
What economic threshold is that for folks who are automatically qualified through eWeb, just out of curiosity? I can see an eWeb commissioner I don't put you on the spot, John.
He knows a thing or two about budgeting, too.
There's a couple of, I don't know if you, that number off the top.
It's low.
So 60%.
60% AMI, okay. Okay. Yeah, I too, like Counselor Zelenka mentioned, wouldn't be supportive of advancing something tonight and then contradicting said advancement. Certainly, if residents in the community want to put something on a ballot, they have the right and authority to do so. But for a whole host of reasons, animal services, library, fire, public safety, and this is hold my nose and stand in the affirmative that I find as a necessity, and to do the antithesis and to bring it down to the studs certainly is not a community that I suppose and imagine the vast majority of this city would not want to see.
Councilor Krasinski.
I'm going to ask some very specific questions about the first line item that happens to be on here, which is both more of an example of what some of the direct impacts would be. So we have 2 FTE in animal welfare right now, is that correct? Yeah, I see Chief Skinner nodding. And we also have a contract with Green Hill to provide some services there. And 1 million of that would basically be eliminating that program. We would have no FTE for animal welfare. Correct. So what I spent this weekend doing was meeting with constituents in my ward, one of whom had been attacked by a dog, viciously attacked by a dog, and did not receive a response from the city's animal welfare until she was attacked on a Saturday. She didn't hear from them until Monday. And the reason for that was because she did receive a response from patrol officers, so that did happen. But she was not able to talk to animal welfare for days after being viciously attacked, because 2 years ago, we cut an animal welfare officer, and they no longer work on the weekends. And so when we look at this list of, and I use that as an example because it's the first one on the list. And I feel like for each one of these items on here, we could have similar stories where we have residents and constituents saying, we want more of this thing. We need more of this service. And I've been on council for a month, and I can probably cite dozens of emails for each of these things that I've received. And so to say like, okay, what we're gonna do is cut these services that we have people saying we need more of them to the bone to where we can't even provide them at all, that's not an option I'm willing to take. The fee that we're talking about, for most people, it's going to cost less than a Netflix subscription. And so when I think about the service that's provided for that, I feel very strongly that this is a decision that we need to make. And we can talk a little bit about whether or not this should go to the ballot, but my view on it is my constituents, my voters, people in my ward, elected me in part so that they wouldn't have to read all of these things, figure out all of these questions, delve into the details of how and why this was. They requested that we, as a council, by electing us, make some of these tough decisions. And saying that we're going to let a few people threaten to bring it to the ballot, which is their right, and that we're going to advocate that tough decision, whichever way we vote is not going to be popular. Nobody likes additional fees. Nobody's going to want to see these cuts. I think we have a responsibility to move the fire fee forward.
Councilor Leach.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Manager, and thank you to all of our staff who I know have had to endure kind of some stress and anxiety around looking at these cuts, and that is not easy. I refuse today to vote to lay off 50 people, at least. I refuse to reduce the safety and security of our community when that is the number one priority that our community has asked us to provide. I refuse to decrease the resiliency of our families in our community with preschool cuts, with reduction in affordable activities and closure of our library. I refuse to impede our ability to respond to emergencies, our fires, mental health crises, natural disasters, and other things that are going to be coming into our community. And I refuse to stunt our ability to go seek additional funding through our intergovernmental relations team, who right now, as we speak, is up in Salem advocating for millions of dollars of funding for our city. So, Councilor Keating, I appreciate your comments about the impact to our low-income people who are not going to want to pay this fee or have the ability to pay this fee. But let's be very, very clear right now that all of these cuts will impact our low-income people way, way more than an average of $10 a month. So I would like us to continue to look at long-term revenue strategies. Our council president and I have spoken today about asking us tonight to vote in favor of a work retreat that will look at long-term sustainable revenue that isn't impactful to our taxpayers as much as a fee like this, so that potentially this could be a temporary fee. But in the meantime, I will not put our safety and our community's security at risk by not voting in favor of this fire fee today. And I encourage all of us to think about that and vote today. Thank you.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Sarah and Twyla and all of your staff that put all the time into preparing this. I'm sure this was a very difficult exercise. And it's gut-wrenching to see what we are looking at in the way of reductions for our community. At the same time, it's also about getting people moving in the same direction. And my concern, I tend to land where Councilor Clark is, of wanting to refer this to the voters, and that we make our case of why this needs to pass. You know, we're obviously not able to make ends meet with existing money for the very reasons that Sarah and Twyla pointed out, that our revenue increases are not keeping pace with inflation. That's a problem with all Oregon cities. We're not the only ones in this boat. But the other thing, whether we pass this or not, we're going to be in the same position yet again in the future, because again, the revenue coming in isn't keeping pace with the cost of inflation. That's why we have a problem. It's Oregon's taxation system is broken. Now, we have very little influence over that at the state level, but at the same time, I've heard from quite a few people that are planning on an initiative petition process, and I believe we have a better chance of managing that ourselves by referring it to the voters and then going out and explaining the why. Right now, people still do not understand the why. And that's how we make our decisions as human beings, is starting with the why, and then you work into the what, the how, and the when. And so I don't think we've done an adequate job of explaining the situation broadly enough to where the members of the public are hearing it. And I actually think they will appreciate it if we are able to spend a little more time communicating. And I know that doesn't help preparing a budget. You'll probably have to prepare two budgets under this scenario, one for if the motion or the measure passes and one if it doesn't. But if we impose this without asking them, and I disagree that that's shirking our responsibility as a council. We make decisions all the time, but money decisions are a very personal thing, and people should have the right to weigh in on that. So I've probably said enough for now, but that's where I am on it. I don't want to see these cuts either. Personally, if this was on a ballot, I would vote for it. But you know, this is other people's money. They get a chance, or should have a chance, to weigh in themselves. Thank you.
Councilor Ye.
Thank you. Apparently my mic's been on the whole time. So I'm going to support the fire fee today, and there's a couple pretty simple reasons for that. The first is that I agree with the city manager that our fire EMS is very similar to a utility. It's something we count on to be there every day. It cannot stop working. We do not have the luxury of people not being ready to go all day long, every day of the year, and very similar to like our water, our wastewater, our electricity, right? So creating a process that has protected adjustable funding seems very appropriate to me for this specific department in our city. And while I'll agree with Councilor Zelenka that this is not going to fix our fire and EMS department's problems, it does get us moving in the right direction of making their department more stable. And while I'm at it, I want to thank our council leadership for coming up with this idea of a work session or a work retreat where we can dive a little bit more into these issues and look for some long-term solutions. I also like some of Councilor Zelenka's ideas around that as well. This is definitely the step one and more steps need to come. No one's saying that we're fixing our department with this. But it does, like I said, get us down the road. The second thing is, while I completely understand that folks on a limited income are affected by taxes, when you look at this list, many of these things, if you are a person of means, you can make up for because you have the money to go and find another source of these services. If you don't have funds, you're relying on the city for those services. You don't have a backup. And so I think it's important to remember that balance, that when you take away those services, it's not like that the person is fine and there is a hole there in their life and in the things that they need.
Councilor Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank the city manager and her team for putting this together. One of the things that I want to ask the city manager is, if we do move forward with the fire fee and we still have the $3 million gap, specifically, what does that $3 million gap look like in terms of what services we are going to have to do without? So I go back to, that's question one. Two is more of a statement. I go back to when I came on council in 2013, and Councilor Zelenka and Councilor Clark were here at that time, and we were hit with a city service fee at that time to close a lot of these gaps. And what we did instead over the last 12 years was progressively cut to the point that we're at now. And what we really need, and what I suggested to the mayor and the council vice president earlier today, was a longer, more in-depth conversation about how we stabilize our budget over the long haul, maybe 10 to 15 years, and look at prioritization of the services that we can and should deliver and we're supposed to deliver by charter, and those that maybe we can deliver in a different way if we work with some of our partners like Lane County and Springfield to deliver the same services in a more comprehensive and collaborative way. Whether they participate with us or not is another question, but I think that we really need to have those kinds of conversations because human rights goes across the board. It's all over the county. It's not just the city of Eugene. People have human rights issues in Springfield, in Junction City, in Cottage Grove. We have other things in terms of parks where we may be able to do some creative things. We already have River Road Parks District that is suffering from, a revenue drain because as people annex into the city, they go out of the park, out of River Road Park District and come into the city's park district. So I think that we need to look at creative ways to deliver services in the future that do not put an extensive burden on what we are doing as a city from a priority aspect. And I probably need a second round, Mayor. If you can answer that one question on 3 million,
There was
that would
actually
be great.
two things. So if you pass a fire fee tonight and we're looking at $3.5 million worth of reductions, we'll be looking at things that are on this list, but we'll be doing what we can to minimize the impact of services because we won't want to be cutting something really important right after you do that. So we'll be working across department boundaries to do that. And you'll have an opportunity, as you always do, when I present the budget, to decide you have a different idea about what that looks like. But we would be looking to maximize the service to the greatest extent we could. The second piece is, part of the reason why I was a supporter of us going to a biennial budget was that you would have time in between to be able to do the kind of work that you're talking about. And we just weren't able to do that this biennium because we've been in this constant trying to solve this critical funding gap. So I do think you have the time to do that. And then I just want to say one other quick thing. Counselor Groves made a comment about the Oregon taxation system, and I was just going to say your budget committee meeting on Wednesday night, we're going to take a dive into that and do a presentation on that. So I would just encourage everyone to be there, and if you're in the audience and you want to watch that, I think it'll be really good.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say to Councillor Leach and to Councillor Evans, thank you for the discussion you've had so far on the idea of long-term budget health for the city. I've been advocating for that for an awfully long time, and I am absolutely in agreement. I'll be there with you, and I'll look forward to the opportunity. I think that it's a desperately needed conversation. Whenever we have any kind of conversation around revenue increasing, the things I always end up talking about at the table are voluntary annexation and growth, like I was talking about in 2015 and 17 for new housing being built in our community and creating a bigger tax base and economic development that creates a bigger tax base. Whenever I've brought those up before, it's been responded to with, yeah, great, but those take forever and we need a short-term solution. And I think we've run out of short-term solutions. I don't think this is something we'll solve with a short-term solution. And I think this one brings us some negative things. And that's why I tend to want to decide. I too believe that we were elected to decide. And my decision would be, no, I don't think this is a good idea. But I also recognize that the people will vote on this. That's my opinion. I believe that either we'll agree to refer it to them to vote where we're in control, and as Randy so eloquently said, we'll have an opportunity to make a case for why this is the best way to go short-term, or they'll sign enough petitions to vote on it in August. But the cost of that bet, if you're going to bet that they're not going to collect that number of petitions, is that we'll have to make a decision by July 1st, by June, on the next year biennial budget, and people will have to be laid off because we won't be able to institute the fee by then. The manager won't have any ability to solve the short term that way, and those firings will have to take place. If we're in control of the ask people what they think, we can make the case, bring them along and say, hey, this is why this is the best option. And so, like I said, at the appropriate time, I'll make that amendment, but I hope my colleagues will really consider that this is an option for us to win, and it avoids the option where we're forced into a really ugly decision-making process. Thank you.
Councillor Zelenka. Yeah.
He wasn't talking about me, he's talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been talking about long-term revenue since we got on the council 18 years ago, and long-term revenue stabilization for years. Totally in favor of those conversations, but we've been looking at that for years and have not come up with any good ideas that would work. But totally willing to have that conversation and move forward with a good, realistic lens on it that can help us in the near term, which is really where the need is. But why you should support this? should be abundantly clear from this list of service cuts. Let me just, we didn't put them in one list, but let me read them. Animal welfare program, gone. Police officers, gone. Crime prevention team, gone. Community safety officers, volunteer and policing, cahoots. Rescue team from the fire department, the hazmat fire department team. Closing fire station, cuts to kids sports, boys and girls club, Amazon pool. Closing Sheldon and the community centers. Closing the library 1 to 2 days. Reducing park maintenance. Homelessness services, gone. Human services funding, significantly reduced. Economic development, out the window. Downtown cleanup, neighborhood services, all gone. That list doesn't make you pay attention and say, oh, that's not good, and this is a modest, very thoughtful way of addressing that with this fire fee that does take into consideration low-income people with the amount, I think the number is like, you know what the number was, how much would go back towards helping low-income people pay their bills? $350,000 out of it. So that would help a great deal of them to help people with that. So it does take into consideration low-income people, but it also, I think Lindsay said it really well, the people who use these services are going to be way more impacted than the amount they're going to pay. So, and that's the way that these service cuts usually end up occurring. They don't impact the high-income people, they impact the lower-income people. It's a very disproportionate impact in the way the system works. So I encourage us moving forward with the fire fee.
Thank you, Council. Any other discussions, requests for discussion? Then Councilor Keating.
Just a quick semantics question, Mayor. We had talked about framing this as a fire service and budget stabilization fee, but the long-term investment is in the fire department. Could you just give me kind of your snapshot about why it's packaged as a fire fee and what those long-term ramifications really are for our local fire department, please?
So it's a bit of a nuance. But what you were directing me to do was, one, can you come up with a funding source? And what I asked the revenue advisors, can we come up with a funding source that stabilizes services? That was the main piece initially. But the second piece was, how are we going to build a tool or a mechanism to increase fire service and stabilize fire in the long run? So the idea actually fits both. It removes a portion of general fund fire services out of the general fund and puts it in a very separate account that is funded by the fee and increases it by $2 million so we can have an increase in fire service, and the chief can talk more about that, about what that would include. But in the long run, all of those funds are in a special revenue fund that is only accessible to fire. It's in a utility model that can adjust as needed. And if you have a general fund reduction in the next year, those funds are off the table and the fire services is protected. And it's not that all of our services don't need to be protected, but I think having that in a utility model that is not subject to the ups and downs and mostly the lack of revenue growth and the general fund is why I recommended it just be for fire. So in the first biennium, it stabilizes a number of these services you're seeing on the page, but it doesn't answer forever the long-term issue that is what you're saying you want to talk to about. So that's how I would explain it.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, a follow-up question to that. You say that protects fire. It only protects them for the money that's in the fee. It doesn't protect them for the remaining percentage of general fund.
Potentially, but it gives you a tool and a mechanism to consider in the future if you need to.
Thank you. And another thing I wanted to mention, if we do pass this fee, I intend to make a motion that it can only be raised with a vote of the council and not be left with administrative decision. You know, if we're going to start getting into people's costs and in their pocketbook, I think it's important that this council be the ones that make those decisions. And it's nothing against the city manager. It's just, if we're going to take that responsibility, I think we need to take all of it. Thank you.
Counselor, or do you want to
Yeah,
answer?
and just so, I don't want your opportunity to pass, if that is your stated, there is a specific code provision in here that gives the authority to the city manager, so you're going to want to move to amend the ordinance to strike that, once the motion to adopt is placed on the table. Yeah, so if you have, are you talking to the provision? So right now, there is a provision that specifically authorizes the city manager to make it, and it's under, I'm sorry, let's see. 6.770 sub 3. 6.770 subsection 3, it's on page 2 of the ordinance, and on page 9 of your council agenda. And it states that the fire service fee shall be based on the total square footage of the buildings or portion of buildings associated with the stormwater service customer's account, and shall be set by the city manager using the procedures, criteria, and limitations set out in sections 2.020 of this code. The city manager shall review and may amend the fire service fee on at least a biennial basis. Then you are establishing the initial rate in this ordinance within your uncodified sections. So subsection 3 of the ordinance, which is an uncodified section, meaning it won't appear in the code, says notwithstanding section 1 of the ordinance, that provision I just read to you, the fire service fee is initially established as follows. And then that's your chart that is set out. And then it says amendments to this initially established fire fee may be made by the city manager in accordance with section 1 of this ordinance. So if you want to, you have some options. If you want to entirely eliminate the city manager's authority to change that, I can try to come up with a motion for you there. Another option would be to have a threshold. If we were to use a mechanism that is similar to some of our other utilities and our SDCs, for example, you have granted the city manager authority to make some administrative changes up to a certain point, and then it comes to the council. So for example, you could amend this subsection 3, this uncodified section, to say, if it exceeds, if the proposed increase would exceed 5% within a calendar year, it has to be done by resolution of the council. And that would be something consistent with your SDC approach and some of your other utility approaches.
I'm sorry to spring this kind of the last minute, but a lot of this stuff has come in at the last minute as well. Is that something you could put together just real quickly for me?
The 5% or elimination entirely?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. I think if you want it to be treated like a utility and to be able to be adjusted, I think if you want to put a cap on it, my recommendation would be to follow the SDC cap. That's 5%. I don't think you want to, I don't think the councils should have a utility discussion at a 1% and 2% rate increase. It's just it'll just take a lot of time, and it's not, wouldn't mirror what you do with stormwater and wastewater.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
I do have a motion prepared that I can hand to you, because I tried to anticipate the motions you may want to make tonight, so.
Counselor Evans.
Thank you, Mayor. I think to create a framework for how this decision moves forward or not is to look at this not in isolation of the services and the folks that are going to be impacted on the city level on this. Our taxpayers are going to be facing rates being raised with eWeb. We're going to come back and ask them in 2 years to renew a CSI that this council, or the previous councils, had put in place, you know, to bolster up our public safety investments. And, you know, I have people constantly coming to me in my ward and in other wards on the west side saying, where's our cops at? Where's our, we're getting hit hard with property crime, personal kind of crimes, all of that stuff. And we're not gaining traction in reducing a lot of the things that are happening. A lot of stuff is going just unreported because people have realized that we don't have the capacity to meet their needs in these areas. So when you talk about your utility bills going to be going up, which, EWEB has to do that, a CSI, and then in the background is lurking the county with a, public safety fee increase and also other increases that may come down the pipe. We have to be very conscious about all of those impacts on our taxpayers and residents, because it's not just, $10 a month per household on average. It will be $10 a month plus EWEB, plus CSI, plus, the gas bill. And, I, for one, find it very hard, even in my own household, to say, to the people who live with me and my neighbors and everybody else, oh, well, we need to increase this and that and the other thing because it's critical for service delivery. And they know it, they understand it, but they're telling me right now, with inflation the way it is, we are not in a position to take it. So I want us to be very cognizant that we're not making this decision in a vacuum.
I have Councilor Kaczynski, Councilors Linka, Councilor Clark, and Ye, and I'm going to close our discussion at that point because we are past our 6:15 milestone, but discussion indicated pretty clearly maybe that we have a shorter discussion after there's a motion on the table. So now I'll pass it over to Councilor Kaczynski.
Thank you very much, Mayor. City Attorney, if we pass this as written tonight, is there an opportunity to perhaps amend things in the future? So if we say, okay, we want to put a cap on how much can be raised, that can be done as a separate motion, and that wouldn't impact at a separate point, and that wouldn't impact the ability to do budgeting right now, because whether or not there's a cap in the future doesn't impact how much that brings in the short term. Is that correct?
You can always amend the ordinance. You would have to follow, it couldn't be done by motion. So once you act tonight, if you adopt the ordinance, you absolutely can amend your ordinances. You do that all the time. You amend your code. You would just need to go through your charter mandated process, which you would have another public hearing and another work session in consideration. But yes, these decisions.
All right, thank you. Yes, and I think this goes to both of those. Like the idea of some sort of cap on that is not something that I would inherently oppose. However, this is something that council has been talking about for a very long time, and I feel like making those decisions and writing those motions at the table is how we end up with language that is not as ideal as we would like. And so might be open to something in the future, but if that had been made earlier, I might have been more supportive of it.
And I would also add, I'm sorry, I was remiss in adding, you often give direction to your city manager, as she is your employee, to do certain things, and one would be, don't raise it above a certain amount before coming and talking to us first, or things like that. That would be consistent with prior actions that you've taken.
Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, we have a no surprises motion guideline for a good reason, and that is that they usually fail because people haven't had time to think about them, and staff hasn't had time to analyze it and get that back to us, and we haven't had time to think about the and analyze the consequences or the unintended consequences of a particular action that could be done on the fly. I think a better way to do that is along the lines of what Eliza was talking about, which is to put a motion, have the city manager bring back some analysis and potential motion on a particular idea. That's a better way to make public policy as opposed to on the fly. We've been working on this for 25 meetings, somebody said, and well over a year with good discussion, good analysis, and good thought. And I'd hate to actually just do something on the fly that came up during the meeting without further discussion, without further analysis. That's not good public policy making.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Oops. Thank you, Mayor. I would second Randy's motion in such a case when it happens, not because I don't trust implicitly our city manager, because I absolutely do. She's amazing, but I don't trust future budget committee decisions where they might use that 1 or 2%. I know that doesn't sound like a big number, but our numbers get bigger and bigger all the time. They might use that as a mechanism by which they balance future budgets to add some program that they really think they need by increasing fire fee a limited amount and take even more general fund money currently going to fire, bring it back to, and use that as a mechanism. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people have concern about this particular way of solving this issue, is because there's no limit on that potential for mischief in the future. And so I agree with Randy. We would want to make sure to, for lack of a better word, to handcuff future budgeting decisions who might want to use that mechanism, increasing it as a Measure 5 workaround in order to solve a future budget problem. The other thing I will say here is that I can't emphasize strongly enough how much I would like for us to be able to make a decision on this that was of the council's will on this. If we send this to the people because we decide to, as a question, we will have at least certainty before the budget has to be finalized this next year. If, in fact, we cannot, and City Attorney, please correct me if I'm wrong, we won't be able to work on any sort of amendments to this if it's held in abeyance because a petition has been filed. Is that correct? Or would we?
That's correct. Once it's referred, there's a period of time where you have a 61-day period prior to the election of an initiative or referendum. The council shall refrain from adopting an ordinance proposed. Or
so as soon as that petition's filed, we're not doing anything on this till August at all, much less answer the question, what does the 25 to 27 budget look like? The cuts become mandatory instantly at that point, because we don't have the ability to plan on this mechanism and the money that comes from it. So we'd have no choice but to start those cuts of city employees in June and no opportunity to know whether or not we could bring them back until, what, October, before we could set the mechanism if the people approved it at an August election? So that's the gamble we're taking by not sending it to a ballot and letting it get put there by a petition. Thank you, Mayor.
And if I can add to the piece I was reading is a code requirement, and there is, if in fact these signatures are collected, your code requires the city manager to come tell you that the signatures had been collected, and that you could at that time, so similar to what happened with Northwest Natural Gas, that ordinance, you chose at that time to repeal it. So I just want to make sure that there will be an actual moment in time that you will have to or have the opportunity to make a decision regarding the ordinance if in fact the signatures are collected to refer it to the ballot.
Councilor Ye.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I actually was going to say something similar to what Councilor Zelenka said, that I don't like doing things on the fly also, and it sounds like these are things that we could talk a little bit about as we go forward. I think the recommendation around 5% is something to think about, but again, doing something at the last minute is never a good idea for the long term, I also think. And just for Councilor Clark, this is not the first time we've talked about this. I love that you are very consistent and that I am oppositely consistent. But it's not a who's right or wrong. It's more of a philosophy of how you think your job is to be. And I am not a fan of sending things that I believe are my decision to make to the voters. And I realize you have a different opinion on that. And we're just going to keep talking about that probably, but I'm very comfortable making this decision. I think it's my job to do it. I think the voters sent me here to do it, and if they think I got it wrong, there is a system for them to fix that. There are actually multiple systems for them to fix it. They can do a referendum. They can not vote for me when it's my time to come up. This is how our system works, and but while I'm here and folks asked me to be here and to do the hard work, I'm gonna make the easy decisions and I'm gonna make the hard decisions. And so this is one of those hard ones, but I think it's the right thing to do for our community, because when I look at this list of things, and many people have already said this, I cannot imagine the Eugene with these things gone. It is heartbreaking to think, and no one in this community will be safer when these things are gone. No one.
I'm now going to turn to the council president to put a motion forward.
Move to, turn the mic on. Move to adopt an ordinance establishing a fire service fee as set forth in attachment A to this AIS.
Second.
Second. Council discussion, Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to amend, I want to read this. Thank you, City Attorney. Move to amend the ordinance to add a new section 6 that states, this ordinance shall take effect only if approved by the voters at the May 2025 election. In such an event, the ordinance shall be effective upon the mayor's proclamation under section 2.986 of the Eugene Code 1971, and the measure has passed.
Second.
Second.
I'll speak to
Motion
that if
in
I
a second. Councilor.
I have given all the reasons why I think this is the case. I will only reply to my friend Jennifer that I actually don't think we disagree on this. I very much believe, too, that people elected me to make decisions, and I don't have a problem making this decision. What I'm saying is it's patently obvious to me that the public will vote on this, whether we like it or not. And so there is a much safer outcome for these programs if we vote in favor of this amendment rather than have it thrust upon us, because then the manager has no choice but has to make the cuts because the election will be later. So I hope to have your support.
Additional discussion from council? Seeing none, I will call for a vote on this amended motion. Voting to, I'm sorry, I may have done that out of order. Motion to amend. Thank you for that clarification. All in favor of the amendment as proposed? 3. All opposed? 5. And the motion fails with a vote of 5-3, or 3-5. Thank you. Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a second amendment. Move to amend Section 3 of the ordinance to add the following sentence. Notwithstanding Section 1 of this ordinance, an amendment to the fire service fee that would increase the fee more than 5% within a 12-month period must be established by resolution of the council.
Second.
Council discussion? Councilor Ye?
I just have a really quick question. If, let's say we don't do this, right? You would have, the city manager, whoever that is, would have the ability to raise the fee. Would that then be done separate from our normal budget process, or would that be wrapped into our budget, our biennial budget process?
But you answer.
It's just, it would be through the administrative fee setting process. So 2.020 of your code gives the city manager authority to set rates and fees. And so if, it wouldn't be part of your budget-making process.
I was just curious. Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Zelenka?
Yeah, I haven't seen the motion or read it, so I'm not exactly sure. You said it once, but, so does this mean that with that motion, the city manager has the authority to do it up to 4.99%?
She would actually have the authority to do it up to 5%, any 5.0.
Over
Yeah,
5%.
It's more than 5%. So 5% and less would be within the city manager's authority under the 2.020 rate-making process. I will say there, just for folks not familiar with that, that code does provide for an opportunity for public comment, and there is a process. It's just not it's not a council-based. It's an administrative process.
You want to put that motion out there? Allows the city manager to do that without discussion, with all that discussion?
Councilor Groves?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in favor of this because I think it does put some sideboards on this. Again, we make ordinances, we make rules to last into the future. And, this is more than just our current administration, and me bringing this forward is not any indication that I don't have complete confidence in our city manager. It's just what I think is good process and good policy, that we have some limitations on a brand-new fee that could quickly spiral out of control. Thank you.
Councilor Keating?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a point of information. You mentioned it earlier, City Attorney, that this proposal is consistent with what?
The motion
Yes, this motion.
is consistent with SDCs. So you adopt as a council the SDC methodology, and you have, but within it, there is established that the city manager can make adjustments to the SDC methodology up to a certain percentage. And anything above and beyond that needs to come to council for approval through a resolution. So, and please jump in if I'm explaining this wrong. And so I took that language, and there's language within the SDCs that cites to construction costs and ties to things like that, but it comes down to around a percentage of 5%. And so that is what this motion would be reflective of. It's similar to other like SDCs, where you all set the fee, but you give up to a certain amount, administrative authority to adjust that fee, and then anything above that comes to you. So it would be consistent with that.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no additional council discussion, we will take a vote on this motion. Amended motion.
No, motion to
A motion
amend.
to amend. Thank you. Just the amendment. All in favor? 5 in favor. All opposed? And the motion passes 5-3. Vote. Thank you. And now back.
So now you have on the table the ordinance for adoption as amended by the motion that just passed.
Council President, would you like to repeat that motion, or do we need to?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
What's that now? Move to adopt an ordinance establishing a fire service fee as set forth in attachment A to this AIS as amended in the, help me with this, Counselor.
Motion that just passed.
The previous motion that just passed. the amended motion.
And that has already been made and seconded. He's just repeating it for information.
Just for clarity. All in favor? Five. All opposed? 3. And the motion passes by a vote of 5-3. Thank you, council. And thank you, everyone. This
Mayor,
oh, I'm sorry.
I have one more motion on the fly that I talked about earlier. And that would be to move to direct the city manager to prepare a council retreat on long-term budget stabilization strategies.
Second.
Any council discussion on this motion?
Yes.
Yes, Councilor Keating.
With respect to my colleague who's been here a lot longer than I, my colleague to my left, often my colleague to my right, I would just ask to respect the council president, council vice president's roles in regards to motion making. That's just my 2 cents. I'm just one of 8. I respect that and I hear that. However, our council vice president has a role. I've served in that position, you've served in that position, and I'd like to honor the process and the position. Thank you, Mayor.
Any additional discussion? Seeing none, I will now take a vote on this motion. All in favor? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Any opposed? 0. And the motion passes 8-0. Thank you very much. Thank you, Council President, for that final motion. And now, that concludes our agenda for today. I will close the February 10th, 2025 City Council work session. We are adjourned.